November 14th, 1965. Central Highlands, South Vietnam. 16 Huey helicopters slice through the morning sky at 2,000 feet, carrying 175 American soldiers toward a jungle clearing marked on maps as Landing Zone X-ray. The rotors beat a rhythm that will haunt these men for the rest of their lives, those who survive. They are the first wave, the vanguard, men of the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment. That regimental number carries weight. History. Ghosts. 89 years earlier, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer led the 7th Cavalry into the valley of the Little Bighorn River in Montana. He was hunting hostile Indians. He found them. 2,000 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors surrounded his command and annihilated it. 268 soldiers died in less than an hour. It became the most famous military disaster in American history. Now, in 1965, the 7th Cavalry is being reborn as an air cavalry unit, helicopter mobile, fast-moving, designed to find the enemy, fix him in place, and destroy him with overwhelming firepower. They are about to test that theory in the Ia Drang Valley, a remote stretch of jungle near the Cambodian border. The Vietnamese call this place Ia Drang. It translates roughly as River of Death. By the time this battle ends, 545 Americans will be killed or wounded. The North Vietnamese will lose over 3,000 men. It will be the bloodiest engagement of 1965, and it will set the pattern for the entire war. Brutal, close-quarters combat, where superior American firepower barely compensates for enemy numbers and determination. But this story begins with a promise. Lieutenant Colonel Harold G. Moore, the battalion commander, sits in the lead helicopter. He is 43 years old, a West Point graduate, a devout Catholic, and a father of 5 children. Before his men boarded these helicopters, Moore gathered them and made a vow. We're going into battle against a tough and determined enemy. I can't promise you that I will bring you all home alive, but this I swear before you and before Almighty God, that when we go into battle, I will be the first to set foot on the field, and I will be the last to step off, and I will leave no one behind. Dead or alive, we will all come home together. It is a promise he will keep. Sound. Helicopter rotors intensify, then sudden change to combat audio at 10:48 a.m. The first helicopter touches down in Landing Zone X-ray. The door gunners are firing before the skids hit the ground. Tracer rounds streak into the tree line. Harold Moore jumps from the helicopter into waist-high elephant grass, his radio operator beside him, his command group fanning out. The air smells of aviation fuel and red clay dust. For 60 seconds, there is only the sound of rotor wash and distant birds. Then the tree line erupts. A single shot cracks across the clearing. A North Vietnamese soldier falls dead 30 yards from Moore's position. Before his body hits the ground, the jungle explodes with automatic weapons fire. AK-47s, RPD machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades. The Americans dive for cover. The LZ, peaceful moments ago, transforms into a kill zone. Moore grabs his radio handset. His voice is calm, measured, the voice of a man who has prepared for this moment his entire adult life. Get the rest of the battalion in here. Now. But to understand how the United States arrived at this moment, how American soldiers came to be fighting in a jungle in Southeast Asia, we must step back. Not just days or months, but years, decades even. Vietnam's struggle for independence did not begin with American involvement. It began with French colonialism, Japanese occupation during World War II, and the rise of Ho Chi Minh's communist movement. In 1954, the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu in a battle that shocked the world. Vietnam was divided, communist north, non-communist south. The Geneva Accords promised elections to reunify the country. Those elections never happened. By 1960, a communist insurgency, the Viet Cong, was gaining strength in South Vietnam, supplied and directed by North Vietnam. President John F. Kennedy sent military advisors to help the South Vietnamese government. After Kennedy's assassination in 1963, President Lyndon Johnson escalated American involvement. In August 1964, following the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Congress gave Johnson broad authority to wage war without a formal declaration. By November 1965, there are 180,000 American troops in Vietnam. Most are engaged in search and destroy missions, patrolling, setting ambushes, trying to locate an elusive enemy who melts into the jungle and villages. But American military commanders, led by General William Westmoreland, believe a different kind of war is coming. They have intelligence that North Vietnamese Army regulars, not just Viet Cong guerrillas, are infiltrating South Vietnam in large numbers. Westmoreland wants to draw them into a major battle where American firepower can destroy them. The Ia Drang Valley is where that collision will occur. The 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, has been in Vietnam for just 6 weeks. They are an experimental unit, designed to use helicopters as the primary means of transport, turning infantry into airborne cavalry that can strike anywhere, anytime. Their commander, Major General Harry Kinnaird, is ordered to search the Central Highlands for enemy activity. In early November, intelligence reports suggest enemy forces are massing near the Chu Pong Massif, a mountain range along the Cambodian border. Kinnaird orders Harold Moore's 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry, to conduct an air assault into the area. The target, Landing Zone X-ray, a clearing at the base of Chu Pong Mountain. Moore studies aerial reconnaissance photos. The LZ is roughly the size of a football field, surrounded by trees. There are no signs of enemy presence. His intelligence officer estimates there may be a small enemy force in the area, perhaps a company, 100 to 150 men. The intelligence is wrong. Hidden in the jungle around X-ray are 3 regiments of the North Vietnamese Army, the 66th Regiment, the 33rd Regiment, and elements of the 32nd Regiment. Over 2,000 soldiers. They have been there for weeks, preparing base camps, stockpiling ammunition, waiting for an opportunity to ambush American forces. When Harold Moore's helicopters land in X-ray, they are landing directly in the middle of an enemy staging area. The North Vietnamese commander, Senior Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen Huyen, cannot believe his luck. The Americans have delivered themselves into his hands. He orders his regiments to surround the landing zone and attack from all sides. He outnumbers the Americans 10 to 1. This should be a massacre. It almost is. Within minutes of landing, Moore's lead companies make contact. Company B, commanded by Captain John Heron, pushes toward the tree line and runs into a reinforced North Vietnamese company. The firefight is immediate and vicious. Men on both sides fall. The Americans call for artillery support. Shells begin landing 200 meters away, marching closer to the enemy positions. Company A, under Captain Ramon Tony Nadel, moves to the right flank and also makes contact. Company C, led by Captain Robert Edwards, is still landing when they come under fire. Moore sets up his command post in a dry creek bed near the center of the LZ. Around him, organized chaos. Radio operators relaying messages, artillery forward observers calling in fire missions, medics treating wounded. Every few minutes, another helicopter lands, bringing more troops and ammunition, taking out wounded. Several helicopters are hit by enemy fire, but keep flying. Moore's executive officer, Major Bruce Crandall, is piloting one of those helicopters. He will make 14 trips into X-ray that day, under constant fire, refusing to leave soldiers on the ground without support. For this, he will eventually receive the Medal of Honor. At 1:20 p.m., Moore orders his second-in-command, Captain Heron, to send a platoon to scout the left flank and locate the enemy's main position. Second Lieutenant Henry Herrick, leading the second platoon, moves out with 27 men. They walk into an ambush. North Vietnamese soldiers, hidden in spider holes and behind trees, open fire at point-blank range. The Americans are caught in the open. Men fall. Herrick rallies his platoon and charges toward a small rise, hoping to gain a defensive position. They make it to the top, but they are now cut off from the main force, surrounded 300 meters from help. Herrick's radio operator, Specialist Ford Jimmy Nakayama, sends a frantic message. "We're cut off. Heavy casualties. Need help? Moore hears the transmission. He orders Company B to move toward Herrick's position and extract the platoon. They cannot get through. The enemy fire is too intense. For the next 16 hours, Herrick's platoon, soon to be called the Lost Platoon, will fight alone. Of the 27 men, 8 will survive. Henry Herrick is not one of them. He is killed in the first minutes of the ambush, shot through the chest. Sergeant Clyde Savage takes command. Around him, the platoon perimeter shrinks as men are hit. They run out of water. They share ammunition. The wounded cry out. Some beg for morphine that the medics no longer have. Through the afternoon and into the night, they can hear Moore's command post calling them on the radio. Hold on, we're coming, hold on. But no one can reach them. By mid-afternoon, Moore has most of his battalion on the ground, 450 men. He forms them into a defensive perimeter, roughly the shape of an oval, with his command post in the center. The perimeter is small, just over 100 meters across at its widest point, but it is tight, interlocking fields of fire, every man within shouting distance of his squad leader. Moore walks the perimeter, checking positions, talking to his soldiers. These are young men, most barely out of their teens. This is their first combat. They are scared. Moore knows this. He stops at each foxhole, asks the men their names, where they're from, makes sure they have ammunition and water. A private from Kansas asks him, "Are we gonna make it?" Moore looks him in the eye. "Yes, we're going to make it, but it's going to be a long night. Stay low, conserve your ammo, and trust your training." Moore is lying. He does not know if they will make it. He has done the math. 450 Americans against an estimated 2,000 North Vietnamese. No reinforcements can arrive until morning. The nearest artillery battery is 6 miles away, close enough to provide support, but too far to guarantee accuracy in the jungle. Air support is available, but darkness is coming, and pilots cannot see targets in the jungle at night. The Americans have 3 advantages: discipline, firepower, and the will to survive. The North Vietnamese have 1 advantage: numbers. At 4:00 p.m., the North Vietnamese attack. They come from 3 directions simultaneously, from the west, the north, and the south. Waves of infantry, blowing bugles, shouting, firing AK-47s. They charge through the elephant grass, across open ground, directly into American machine gun fire. It is suicidal, and it nearly works. The Americans pour fire into the attackers. M60 machine guns rip through belts of ammunition. Riflemen fire on semi-automatic, picking targets, squeezing triggers. Grenadiers launch M79 rounds into clusters of enemy soldiers. Artillery shells explode in the tree line, shredding vegetation and flesh. The North Vietnamese keep coming. In some places, they reach the American foxholes. Hand-to-hand combat erupts. Soldiers stab with bayonets, club with rifle butts, grapple in the dirt. A North Vietnamese soldier lunges at an American machine gunner. The gunner's assistant shoots him at a range of 2 feet. Another enemy soldier throws a grenade into a foxhole. It explodes, killing 1 American and wounding 2 others. For 20 minutes, the issue is in doubt. The North Vietnamese are inside the perimeter in several places. Officers and sergeants scream orders. Men who have never fired a weapon in anger are now killing at ranges measured in yards. And then the artillery finds its range. Forward observers call in danger close fire missions, shells landing within 200 meters of friendly positions. The explosions walk through the attackers. Bodies are flung into the air. The assault breaks. The North Vietnamese pull back, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead. The Americans have held, but the cost is high. Every company reports casualties. Medics move through the perimeter, triaging wounded, calling for medevac helicopters. The helicopters come in under fire, blades chopping through the smoke, loading stretchers, lifting off immediately. Moore checks his casualty count: 12 killed, 42 wounded so far. And the sun is setting. Night falls like a curtain. The jungle, already dark under the triple canopy, becomes absolute blackness. The Americans cannot see 5 feet in front of them. They rely on sound: the crack of a twig, the rustle of grass, the whisper of Vietnamese voices coordinating in the darkness. Moore orders illumination rounds fired every 15 minutes. Artillery shells burst overhead, suspended by parachutes, casting a flickering, ghostly light across the battlefield. In that light, the Americans can see bodies, North Vietnamese dead lying in the grass, some close enough to touch. At 10 o'clock p.m., the bugles begin. The North Vietnamese use bugles to communicate orders in the field. Different notes mean different commands. To the Americans, the sound is unnerving alien, a signal that something is coming. And something is. At 10:30 p.m., the second major assault begins. This time, the North Vietnamese attack from all sides, attempting to overrun the perimeter in the darkness. They crawl through the grass, moving silently until they are within grenade range, then charge with blood-curdling screams. The Americans fire blindly into the darkness, aiming at muzzle flashes, at shadows moving in the illumination light, at sounds. Tracer rounds arc across the battlefield like red lasers. Grenades explode. Men die in the dark, unseen, their last moments witnessed only by the enemy who killed them. Sergeant Major Basil Plumley, Moore's senior NCO, moves through the perimeter with a shotgun and a .45 pistol, reinforcing weak points, pulling wounded men to safety, shooting North Vietnamese soldiers who penetrate the line. Plumley is a legend, a veteran of World War II, Korea, and now Vietnam. He is 50 years old, hard as iron, and utterly fearless. At one point, a North Vietnamese soldier jumps into a foxhole occupied by two young privates. Before the enemy can fire, Plumley shoots him in the head with his pistol at point-blank range. "Get back on your weapon," Plumley tells the stunned privates. They're not done yet. The attack lasts 2 hours, wave after wave. The North Vietnamese are willing to die in extraordinary numbers to break the American perimeter. At one point, they nearly succeed. A company-sized assault hits the southern edge of the perimeter, threatening to collapse the line. Captain Tony Nadel's Company A is forced to fall back 20 meters, yielding ground, contracting the perimeter. Moore rushes to the breach with every available man, clerks, radio operators, anyone who can hold a rifle. He personally directs artillery fire to within 50 meters of his own position. The shells explode in the trees, showering the Americans with splinters and shrapnel, but stopping the attack. By midnight, the North Vietnamese pull back again. The perimeter holds, but Moore knows they will come again before dawn. November 15, 1965. First light. The sun rises over landing zone X-ray, revealing a scene from hell. The ground outside the American perimeter is carpeted with bodies. North Vietnamese dead, hundreds of them, piled in places 2 and 3 deep. The smell is overpowering. Flies swarm. The elephant grass is trampled and burned, the earth torn by explosions. Inside the perimeter, exhausted Americans slump in their foxholes, too tired to speak. They have been fighting for 20 hours. Some have not eaten, most have not slept. They are filthy, covered in red clay and blood, their own and the enemy's. Moore is on the radio, coordinating the arrival of reinforcements. Additional companies from the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry are landing, along with elements of the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry. The perimeter expands. Ammunition is distributed. The wounded are evacuated. But one task remains: reaching the lost platoon. All night, Moore has been listening to the faint radio transmissions from Sergeant Savage and the survivors of Lieutenant Herrick's platoon. They are still alive, still surrounded, still holding a tiny perimeter 300 meters away. Moore has promised he will not leave them. Now, with reinforcements on the ground, he can make good on that promise. Captain Nadel's Company A, reinforced by elements of Company B, moves out toward the lost platoon's position. They expect heavy resistance. Instead, they find silence. The North Vietnamese have withdrawn during the night, pulling back into the mountains to regroup and count their own losses. At 9 o'clock a.m., Company A reaches the lost platoon. Of the 27 men who walked into the ambush, 8 are still alive. 4 are unwounded. 4 are seriously injured. The rest are dead, their bodies lying where they fell, some showing signs of being mutilated by the enemy after death. Sergeant Savage, who has held the position for 16 hours, stands and salutes Captain Nadel. His voice is hoarse, barely audible. "Reporting 8 effectives, sir. Request permission to withdraw." Nadel, a tough combat veteran, feels tears sting his eyes. "Permission granted, Sergeant. You did good. You held them." The survivors are carried back to the perimeter. The dead are wrapped in ponchos and prepared for evacuation. Moore walks among them, looking at their faces, committing each name to memory. He will write letters to their families. He will keep his promise. The battle at X-Ray is not over. For the next 2 days, sporadic fighting continues. The North Vietnamese probe the perimeter, testing for weaknesses, launching small attacks that are repulsed with artillery and airstrikes. American patrols venture beyond the perimeter to clear enemy dead and search for intelligence documents. They find evidence of massive enemy casualties, blood trails, makeshift grav, abandoned equipment. On November 16th, Moore's battalion is relieved by the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, and elements of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry. Moore and his men are airlifted out of X-Ray, returning to their base at Nkhi for rest and refitting. They have been in continuous combat for 56 hours. They are utterly spent. As Moore's helicopter lifts off, he looks down at the battlefield. The clearing is scarred with bomb craters and littered with debris. Smoke still rises from the tree line. He thinks about the men he has lost, 59 killed, 121 wounded. He thinks about the promises he made and the promises he kept. But the Battle of Ia Drang is not finished. It is about to claim more victims in the most horrific way possible. November 17th, 1965, 2 miles northeast of X-Ray. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McDade commands the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, the unit that relieved Moore at X-Ray. McDade is ordered to march his battalion overland to a new landing zone called Albany, where helicopters will extract them. It is supposed to be a routine movement, a couple of hours through relatively secure terrain. It is anything but routine. McDade's battalion moves in a long column through the jungle, over 400 men strung out along a narrow trail. They are tired, complacent, not expecting contact. The North Vietnamese 8th Battalion, battered from the fighting at X-Ray, is withdrawing through the same area. When they spot the American column, they attack. At 1:15 p.m., the North Vietnamese hit the American column from both sides simultaneously. It is the perfect ambush, close range, sudden, overwhelming. The Americans are caught in the open, unable to form a coherent defense. Units are separated. Command and control collapses. Soldiers fight individual battles, isolated from their leaders, surrounded by enemy soldiers. It is chaos. It is slaughter. In the first 15 minutes, over 100 Americans are killed or wounded. Men are shot at ranges of 5 feet. Hand-to-hand combat rages throughout the column. A sergeant grapples with a North Vietnamese soldier, strangles him, picks up the enemy's AK-47, and keeps fighting. A lieutenant, surrounded and out of ammunition, calls in artillery on his own position, dying alongside the enemy soldiers who have overrun him. Captain Joel Sugdines, commanding one of the companies, is killed almost immediately. His executive officer takes command, is killed minutes later. The company disintegrates into small groups, each fighting for survival. Unlike X-Ray, where Moore was able to establish a tight perimeter and coordinate fire support, Albany is a running gun battle with no clear lines, no organized defense. American artillery cannot fire without hitting American soldiers. Airstrikes are delayed because no one can mark friendly positions. The fighting lasts 4 hours. By nightfall, when reinforcements finally arrive and the North Vietnamese withdraw, the cost is staggering. 155 Americans killed, 124 wounded. It is the highest single-day casualty count for an American battalion in the entire war. Bodies are scattered through the jungle, some mutilated, some stripped of weapons and equipment. Wounded men lie hidden in the undergrowth, afraid to call out, listening to enemy soldiers moving through the area. It takes 2 days to recover all the dead. Albany is the dark shadow of Ia Drang, the counterpoint to X-Ray. At X-Ray, leadership, discipline and firepower prevailed. At Albany, confusion and complacency led to disaster. Both battles are part of the same campaign, separated by 2 miles and 2 days, but offering radically different lessons. Together, X-Ray and Albany constitute the Battle of Ia Drang, 545 American casualties over 4 days of fighting. When the shooting stops and the casualty reports are filed, both sides claim victory. The Americans point to enemy body counts. Over 3,000 North Vietnamese killed, according to estimates based on captured documents and intelligence reports. They demonstrate that American forces can meet the enemy in open combat and prevail through superior firepower and air mobility. General Westmoreland declares Ia Drang a success, proof that his strategy of attrition, finding the enemy, fixing him in place, and destroying him, can win the war. The North Vietnamese draw different conclusions. They have fought the Americans to a standstill, inflicted heavy casualties, and proven they can withstand massive firepower. Senior Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen Huan, the NVA commander at Ia Drang, reports to Hanoi that American soldiers are brave and well-equipped, but vulnerable to close-quarters attacks that negate their advantages in artillery and air support. If Vietnamese forces can get close enough, grab them by the belt, as the saying goes, they can kill Americans in large numbers. Historian Stanley Carno, in his definitive work, Vietnam, A History, calls Ia Drang the battle that convinced both sides they could win. The Americans believed they could win through firepower. The North Vietnamese believed they could win through will. Both were right, both were wrong. What followed was 10 more years of war, escalation, Tet Offensive, gradual withdrawal, Paris Peace Accords, and finally, the fall of Saigon in 1975. Ia Drang set the pattern. Brutal, indecisive battles where tactical victories did not translate into strategic success. For the soldiers who fought there, Ia Drang was formative. It was their introduction to combat, to death, to the realization that war is not glorious or clean, but chaotic and terrible. Many of them would serve multiple tours. Some would be killed in later battles. Others would survive the war only to struggle with the psychological scars. What would later be called post-traumatic stress disorder, but in 1965 had no name at all. Harold Moore kept his promise. He returned to the United States with his battalion. He wrote letters to the families of every man killed under his command, over 300 letters in total. He attended funerals. He carried the weight of those losses for the rest of his life. In 1992, Moore co-authored a book with journalist Joseph Galloway, who had been at X-Ray as a combat correspondent. The book was titled, "We Were Soldiers Once, and Young." It became a bestseller, later adapted into a film starring Mel Gibson. The book ends with a simple dedication to the young men who died in the valley of the Ia Drang and to their families. Today, the Ia Drang Valley is quiet. The jungle has reclaimed the battlefield. The landing zone where Harold Moore made his stand is overgrown with vegetation. Farmers work the fields nearby. There is no memorial at X-Ray, no marker at Albany. But in Washington, D.C., on the black granite walls of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, you can find them. The names of the men who died at Ia Drang. They are listed by date of death, November 14th through 17th, 1965. You can run your fingers over the etched letters and feel the loss. 79 names from X-Ray and Albany. 79 young men, average age 19, who went into the valley and did not come home. There is a tradition among veterans of the 7th Cavalry. Every year on November 14th, survivors of Ia Drang gather to remember their fallen comrades. They recite the names. They tell the stories. They make sure that those who died in the valley are not forgotten. Joseph Galloway, the journalist who was there, wrote these words: "We who survived the battlefield owe a debt to those who did not. They gave up their tomorrows so that we could have ours. We must never forget that. We must never stop telling their stories." This has been the story of Ia Drang, the first battle, the test of wills, the valley where America learned what kind of war it had entered and what kind of soldiers would fight it. They were soldiers once and young. They walked into the valley of death, and some did not walk out. We remember them.